is not a part in the car industry that gets a lot of attention, although it's probably the most important in terms of its ability to spur growth and create jobs now. I am talking about the aftercare car market of the industry, and it is the market that ensures that the cars that we buy as individuals and companies stay safe and roadworthy. In this CNBC Africa special with myself, Fifi Peters, we will be giving attention to this important component of the auto industry, getting under the bonnet of the aftercare market in Africa, looking at the parts of the industry that need repair and protection from unfair practices like dumping, as well as discussing how to support the growth of workshops on the ground through reskilling and skilling, and to ensure that the cars that we take to those workshops are well looked after. Feel free to share your thoughts with us as motorists or as stakeholders in the industry. But first, let's meet the panelists that will accompany us on today's ride.
Nono, Regional President, Automotive Aftermarket for Africa, Bosch. Terry Munye, Chief Financial and Innovation Officer at Nexus Automotive International, South Africa. Ibrahim Gattiz, Chairman and CEO of SMG Group. Janelle Shah, Executive Director at Auto Express Limited.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. It is delightful to be with you all today. Eve, perhaps if I can ask you to start the conversation for us, sir. How would you describe the current state of the aftercare car market in Africa, just given the impact of COVID-19, sir, and what we also saw the pandemic do to new car sales initially, as well as what the pandemic did to the number of motorists that were on the road due to work from home?
Thank you, Fifi. Thank you for having us I can speak, I hope, on behalf of my colleagues on the will be the other panelists. It's a pleasure to be on stage with you and live streaming about this exciting topic, which is aftermarket. And as I used to say to some of colleagues, I truly believe that aftermarket is sexy, is a place to be, and it's about now. It's also about the future, because nowadays, with 16 million vehicles on the continent, we are talking about a yearly turnover of more than $30 billion, which is generated just from the automotive aftermarket. So going back to your question with respect to the impact on the ongoing pandemic, I would say that the impact is noticeable. It's noticeable because we are having some countries' economy severely affected. We still have some travel ban regarding certain countries, but we also have certain countries, also within the continent, now for precautionally having closed their border. What does it mean? This means that is impacting the supply chain significantly. The supply chain has been under, steady stress during the last months and the last 1.5 years, and this is not expected to change right now. However, we are all dealing with the challenge. As you know, mobility is the basic needs, right? It's like eating. So we need to be mobile, to visit our friend and family. We need to be mobile to go to the hospital. We need to go to work and so on. So mobility is a basic need. Therefore, we are trading. We are still active on the automotive aftermarket. The impact is significant in terms of GDP from country-wise, but we also have certain countries in the continent, for instance, Egypt, where almost no real lockdown were implemented, and they have been able to show a more than 3% GDP growth in 2020. So I think that the Africa context is quite fragmented, quite challenging, and with different trends depending where you come from. So what is mean for the aftermarket? The vehicle operation, there is no change in this regard. So we say roughly 60 billion. So those vehicles are still traveling, and we need to have the oil change, you need to have battery change, you need to have your service interval. This is happening. What the pandemic and the ongoing material, I would say, shortage, raw material shortage we are experiencing have been leading to a restriction, a drop into the new car sale. But what is mean for the aftermarket that the mobility user are using longer their car and they are not switching too fast to new car, which is also could be very attractive and positive for the aftermarket. So I will say there's no reason to be in panic mode, right? The colleagues and peers might comment from their perspective. I want to give them the ball also to comment how they experience the pandemic toward to a business now. But from our side, we have put all the measure in place and together with our customer and partner. They are aware about the logistic challenges. We have early warning system in place, and we also have put more focus on the topic of forecasting and planning, which is remain key right now. And but also, of course, like everyone, we are also looking very, really diligently in the topic of network and capital. So I will just pass the ball to, if you don't mind, for one of my colleagues to elaborate a bit on that sentence.
Yeah, not at all, Yves. Thanks so much for setting, I think, quite a holistic picture of the current state of your industry right now in terms of the impact of the pandemic. It was felt like in all industries, the impact on the supply chains and what the difficulty of getting goods in and out the continent have been. But I believe that another challenge and a pressing challenge that your industry does face is the issue around dumping as well as counterfeit goods. And Janelle, if I can just perhaps bring you in the conversation at this point to just reflect on this current challenge around dumping and perhaps give us a sense of whether the situation has improved currently compared to what the situation was like before the pandemic landed.
In our business, which at Auto Express, we have a large share of the tire market, and as a freight cost from the east has increased over the last 6 months, there's actually more pressure for stuffing tires into tires. So we get 4 tires stuffed into 1 tire, and that does 2 things, and that's obviously to try and reduce the freight for the consumer or for the importer, but it also damages the tires and deforms the tire. And also gives opportunity to have uncustomer goods. So people declare only 1 tire in a container, and actually there are 4 tires coming through. So that's created a lot of challenge for us, legitimate importers, and we've been having a lot of issues, and we've been engaging the revenue authorities and Kenya Bureau of Standards and so forth to highlight these problems we're having. And we've had some traction on it, but it's taking some time. All
right, so still quite a bit of an issue, the stuffing of tires into tires. I didn't even know that was a thing, but thanks for bringing that to our attention. Thierry, perhaps if you can also reflect on the issue of product dumping. From where you are seated, to what degree does it still remain a pressing challenge in the aftercare market here on the continent?
Yes, thank you, and thanks for having us in this discussion. Indeed, I think the question on counterfeit is one of the key questions that we have indeed in the African market, and not only in African continent, if I would like to say, but also in many fast-growing markets. And one of the key elements when we talk about counterfeit is definitely to have the capacity in a continent to put in place the right model and the right standard in terms of trainings, in terms of educations, in order to prepare people to understand really what value creation means for them, for their family, and for the business. And of course, counterfeit is always a key trend to look for the cheapest price and on the part which is the fastest available part that they can find. But in reality, it's something that damages a lot all the industry for different type of reason. First, from a safety perspective, which is something where definitely there is a strong need to make people being more aware on the fact that maintenance can cost less with better quality parts as compared to using counterfeit parts that will damage more the engine and the vehicle that will be used. And secondly, also because basically we believe that education is a way also for them to understand, for all the young generation, for the mechanics, but also for some jobbers, distributors, is a way for them to understand how to create more value for their own system and for their own business, due to the fact that loyalty, trust, and transparency will be bringing to the market. And I think that's really something where when we talk about counterfeit, we should not only think about having the wrong part or having the bad part, but we should think about what it means in terms of education, in terms of trust and transparency, which we do believe strongly that in Africa, it's something which is more than needed.
All right. Ibrahim, can you give us some opening thoughts and also the Egyptian perspective? As Yves did tell us in his opening, the fact that, I mean, you didn't really experience as significant of lockdowns as was experienced in other parts of the country. Your economy even grew throughout the pandemic. But nonetheless, what were the pressing points for Egypt's aftercare car market, and to what degree are counterfeit products as well as product dumping a current pressure point for you, sir?
Well, thank you, Fifi, for having us with you today. To be quite honest, we are quite lucky here in Egypt that we did not have much of lockdowns like many other countries have experienced. This, in one turn, it helped us continue our operation and see growth potentials, because during periods of pandemics or national crisis, people tend to scare out, and a lot of people actually got scared off from the pandemic, and they decided to slow down their operations or to shut down or to cancel orders and stuff like that. So this actually gave us a good opportunity to grow in the market at that time. With regards to counterfeit products, this has been a marathon here in Egypt over the past several years. A lot of people are sourcing from Asia, particularly a lot of counterfeit products. But lately, the government has implemented a new system which is called Nafeza, and this is really helping to put somehow a stop on this importation of counterfeit products, because all the importers will have to declare through an advanced cargo information system all the imports, and the exporter from the other side will have to declare the same thing. So basically, the government is looking at both sides of the table, and they are able to catch better and limit the importation of counterfeit products or tax evasion through under-invoicing or not declaring fully the goods.
Perhaps if we just stick then on the matter of interventions currently underway, Yves, coming back to you, sir, reflecting on how the Egyptian government is trying to deal with the matter of counterfeit goods and product dumping. What are your thoughts on this kind of intervention, whether this kind of intervention is needed in other parts of the continent to perhaps nip this present challenge in the bud?
Yes. Indeed, I think that the intervention is required, and it's a must. It's a must to be. If we look at what happened right now, is that without the right regulatory framework, we are not able, as a supplier, international supplier, to compete, right? Because we are competing with people we don't pay tax. We are competing with not people, but those products which are not exposed to the same standard, the same quality. And like Jerry mentioned, at the end of the day, it is about also education, because you get less for your money, and you are thinking you are saving some money. So I think that the regulatory framework is required. It is required first to set the right standard, right? What is the minimum requirement for a vehicle on the road in Egypt, in Ghana, in Kenya, in South Africa, and so on? By setting those standards, we create already the demand for parts, I would say, right? That we say we don't need to have a car without brake or without light on the road, because it's just not safe for our kids, for people, but also not probably safe even in terms of emission for the environment. So if you put those standards, and this has to be done jointly from the private sector together with the authorities, the government, and involving other stakeholders, because those standards, the creation of those standards, bringing the state of the art and required minimum, also sometimes mean upscaling infrastructure, mean upscaling workshops, because the workshop need to be able to diagnose those new vehicles, right, where the software content is significantly increasing right now. So, and upscaling those workshops mean investment, and investment mean we need affordable credit scheme. So I think it is really a holistic question which need to happen, and action, need for action, call for action. In the driving seat are the government, because without the political willingness, it is not possible to orchestrate and to put the right standard in place, because you have to think about the collateral effect. If you put the wrong standard, and this is the case right now in some North country where we have regulation changing overnight, and we have a 2 months goods container, a bunch of container waiting at the port, and we are working now on the paperwork because the change was made overnight. I think that regulation are needed, urgently needed, but it's not need to be done in a smart way and without consideration of the African context as well.
All right. Gentlemen, or Janelle specifically, can I ask us to just reverse a bit in this conversation? Where do a lot of these counterfeit goods come from? I know that Ibrahim had mentioned Asia. I'm just wondering if Asia is the only country in which these products are coming in from, and how are they allowed in the continent?
So generally, there is a lot of manufacturers. Most of the manufacturing has moved to the Far East. And obviously, those countries are producing a lot of the goods for the main manufacturers, and there are a lot of, I call them copycat manufacturers, who are producing counterfeit products. Sometimes they look very similar to the or have names which are very similar, and they are coming through the same borders as we import our goods from, but they're obviously compromised officials on the borders, essentially.
All right. Okay, because Thierry, in terms of your intervention, sir, you had mentioned the importance of education around some of these counterfeit products, and education around the fact that perhaps the initial cost might be a little bit more, but the maintenance costs over time comes down, and education around the safety element of using some of these products as motorists. While I do take your point, sir, I just wonder whether, just given the weakness of our economies now, because of the pandemic, although some economies have been weaker even prior, whether there is also an argument to be made about the original parts perhaps being a bit too expensive or too unaffordable for most motorists, and whether this is why it is more enticing to go and get a cheaper alternative, which perhaps may not be safer.
Fifi, it's always, I think this tendency or this trend is not linked to the automotive aftermarket, or it's a general trend that people are always seeking for a better price and cheaper price and as the best opportunity that they can find in order to win a little bit more money. Our industry is more complex than that. That means basically we are talking about parts and technical parts which have been implemented and used to repair some cars which are used to travel, used to go to work, used to bring kids at school, used to repair and to bring new investment in the market. And for that, we need to have vehicles which are reliable. That's the first key element. And to be reliable, there's some standard on a car, there's some standard on the parts that you need to put a certain standard of a part on a certain standard of a car. And it's not because we want to generate or to create a type of business flow around that, it's just for the safety of the people. But for that, when I was saying that people need to understand the fact that the product dumping, counterfeit products are generating some extra cost as compared to what we believe, is that at the end of the day, using wrong products, using counterfeit products, should generate, in most of the case, or in almost all the case, will generate the fact that we'll have a lower quality level of the maintenance of the car, and we'll have some more damage on the car, and it will contribute to bring extra cost and additional cost for the car driver and for the car user. And that's something which is very important, because a qualitative part will bring better maintenance, will bring better safety, but will also bring a better usage of the engine and a better usage of the car. So it means it's prolonged to a certain extent. It will prolong the usage of the car in the way you are using your vehicle. And that's something which is important, because instead of replacing 2 times per year or 2 times or 3 times per year, depending on the part, a certain part in a vehicle, if you use a qualitative part, which can be a little bit more expensive at the beginning, but you will not have to replace it so much. The second element which is important is that I do completely understand with this trend on this idea of getting things cheaper. But for that, if you want to get back to a more qualitative vision, to something more reliable for the different countries in Africa. We need to better educate the car repairers, the technicians, sometimes the street repairer, also to understand what is the difference, also to understand what it means, bringing more trust on your customers, bringing more safety. And that is a question of education. I think you raised a question, Fifi, at the beginning of the discussion to Yves, saying, what is the impact of COVID? What is the impact of this trend that we've seen over the past 2 years, how it has damaged some market? We should not forget the fact that indeed, Yves, you're right when you talk about $33 billion size of the sector in Africa. But if you look a little bit at the different surveys, in 2024, we should be at $48 billion. The growth is huge. Why? Because you have approximately 1.5 billion people living in Africa. And each year, you have the equivalent of the French population growing year after year in the African continent. If you consider the fact that the car park is between 16 to 20 years old, if you consider the fact that there is more and more young African people coming to work, going on the market to work, and if you consider also the fact that there is indeed a new type of category of people, a mid-class category people that emerge progressively in Africa, it means that this industry will have a massive role to play by keep on growing year after year during the coming decades. And that in Africa is something which people should not forget. But if you want to grow like that, if you want to really be capable to really use that as a true value for the continent, from a political side, from an economical side, and from an education side, you need to have a reliable base of people having the right knowledge, the right know-how, and how to address that correctly. Right. And let's not forget also the fact that approximately after COVID crisis, what was really something that appeared to the eyes of the global market is the fact that more than 90% of the companies in Africa are what we call small and middle-sized companies. So basically, they don't have access, or the team don't always have access to the right level of education, to the right level of last update on something that changed, especially in our market. And that, for me, is the key starting point. Whatever we want to build tomorrow in Africa, it's not only nice to educate, but it's to invest in structure in order to propose some good education, to propose some programs, to propose some reliable follow-up of the people, and to drive also a future for many people who are looking for a sustainable job for them and for their family. But a sustainable job means, in our industry, also a sustainable part and a reliable part. Okay. That's why, for us, we're always strongly opposed to counterfeit. I think you're right. We always say that counterfeit is coming from an Asiatic background or Asiatic, let's say, manufacturing environment, which is a trend, which is also quite in line with the car park in Africa. But without talking about where the part is manufactured, it's important that people understand how important it is to bring qualitative parts to the car if you want to maintain and prolong and extend the life of usage of a vehicle.
All right. Point taken. But Thierry, just as you've brought us into the lane of skills, perhaps let's stick in that lane. And Ibrahim, you and I are moving forward from the lane of skills and capacitating small businesses. Perhaps we're talking about workshops here in your industry to grow and to perhaps live up to their potential of not ensuring that the cars that they service are safe, but that they make a meaningful contribution to the economy as well as to the creation of jobs. So what's happening on your side of town in terms of capacitating SMEs? Where are the opportunities in your view in which we can bring and support a lot more here?
Thank you, Fifi. For us here in Egypt, we are working on two parallels. One side is educating the customer themselves about the quality of the products and importance, like Thierry was talking, to educate them that the cost of breakdowns is actually more costly for them than actually buying the more expensive products. So we need to work on the end user from one side, and from the other side, we are working to develop the skills of technicians and mechanics in the market, particularly in the smaller workshops in the streets, in order to bring up their skill level to be able to fit the products properly in the vehicles and as well to educate them about the products that we are working with in order to promote them. So we help them with, on the one side, on the technical knowledge, and on the other side with support with some tools and equipment for their workshops.
Okay, because as you rightly said, Eve, a lot of these workshops will need the tools and they will need the equipment, and it's very tempting to buy something that will help you run your workshop in a way where you minimize your costs and you maximize the profits, but at the same time, long term, that is not sustainable. So help us understand from Bosch's point of view, the kind of interventions that you are making in the training space.
Okay, thank you. Maybe please allow me to give some context. And if we talk about what we are doing, from a Bosch perspective, you have to think about Bosch being one of the key supplier globally with a strong, I would say, value proposition or involvement on the car manufacturing side, what we call the OE side. This means before the aftermarket. So this gives us a very I would say, strong baseline to act in the aftermarket. If we look at Bosch aftermarket, we have in our portfolio today the spare part, what we talk about. We have the diagnostic, what we talk about. We have the trainings, technical trainings, what we talk about. And then we also have then the workshops, right? And if you know, with the Bosch Car Service, by the way, this year we are celebrating 100th year. So you have to think about that. 1921, the first time, the first Bosch Car Service was opened by our founder in Hamburg, in Germany. And today on the continent, we have more than 200 Bosch Car Service. So what's mean Bosch Car Service in our portfolio? From a training perspective, we talk about one side is the product training and one is the technical training. And there we have different concepts in place. We have, for example, the trainer approach. This means we will train the trainer from our partner, for example, to train their mechanics and to bring them at a certain level. In terms of Bosch Car Service, we have mandatory training what we give because it is a franchise-based concept what we have with more than 30,000 workshops around the world. So certain training are mandatory to keep up to date at state of the art. So there also we will apply the train for the trainer concept where we train those people, but we also will have to apply certain technical training to the roadside mechanica and to any other stakeholder on the continent or in the market. To make it more precise, if you think about the case of South Africa, we do have a state-of-the-art training center in Midrand in Johannesburg. We have a training facility in Cape Town, and we have as well in KwaZulu-Natal in Durban. But it is not about the fact that this training are dedicated to Bosch customer. It is open, right? It is open for any stakeholder, a player around the market based on the curricula. And in that sense, we are very active in that field. Another example, I would say, is the case of Kenya, or better, let me take the case of Ghana. In Ghana, what we had started just 1.5 years ago is the initiative, what we have launched the WAVA. WAVA stands for West African Vehicle Academy. What we did is, together with a partner and the GIZ, a non-profit organization, we have put together a training facility in Accra today, which is serving the entire market. And we are talking about OEM mechanics coming to visit those training. We are thinking about roadside mechanica coming to visit training, independent work visiting those training, and where we tried really to adjust this training to the basics need in the continent, in the countries, but also to the mega trend what we see going on in this area. So for me, there is no way around trainings, right? We need to upskill the people involved in that business, but also even more, it was mentioned by Thierry, the topic also of the consumer, right? There's certain also, I would say we need to be more vocal about aftermarket, in my view, about in Africa. Mm-hmm. So there's a point we need to make, cheap is not cheap. And we always have to think about, if we talk about servicing our car, if we talk about maintaining our car, we have to have in mind the concept of total cost of ownership. The total cost of ownership is, I'm looking at my car or my expense, not only for the price of my part of the car, but I look also on what is implied in terms of replacement, what is the replacement rate, do I replace then 3 or 4 times because I don't have the right part? You have also to look at what is mean in terms of, for instance, in terms of vehicle, about the insurance,
Sure.
about the use, the weight, and all those. So I think that training is essential, and I will just only encourage, and I have seen also our partner and a customer also acting in a similar way, embracing also those initiatives we have around the continent in order to upskill the market. Yeah.
Okay. I would agree with you that cheap is cheap. I learned that in university when I had to replace the hills that I bought every year as a result of them having a very short life. Because they were cheap. Nonetheless, to your point though, around the skills that the training that is currently being conducted by Bosch, perhaps even other players in your industry, it sounds to be at this stage quite extensive. But of course, after you have received the training and you have received the know-how on how to get going and you're ready to set up your workshop, there's the element of the initial cost to do so and the cost to get all the gadgets and the tools and the equipment in. And Janelle, perhaps if I can just get your thoughts here, and do feel free to also reflect on training and skills development, but for the setup costs and accessing finance in order to do so as workshops, I believe that your company runs around 45 outlets or so, but how would you describe the access to finance for individuals, for these mechanics or these stakeholders in the industry who are wanting to get going? What has the response been from the financial sector to support them?
So thank you very much. If you, just to go backward regarding training, we also have our own training school. The reason why we set up our own training school is while we have pretty good, decent mechanics coming out of the national training schools out of Nairobi and Mombasa, but the technology is changing very quickly. So most of the control is moving from manual control to electronic control for the newer cars. So you don't have cables and hydraulic oil pushing the brakes. So you actually have a small onboard computer, which is telling, or throttle control, which is computer-based. And the newer cars are all of this new technology. And a lot of the mechanics that we have, or in the past have been trained, are ones which are good at mechanically replacing parts. But I think more and more is a computer-driven program. It's more diagnostics. So the skills needed are very different. And we are now reskilling or upskilling our technicians in-house to look after the better cars and the newer cars. So that's what we've done in terms of training in Kenya. And the great thing about Africa, or especially in East Africa, 75% of people are less than 25 years old. So not everybody can become a doctor or go to university or become a lawyer. There are lots of there's a lot of need for jobs. And this is very good vocational training. And we found that every Christmas we take in about 20 interns who, if they're good, they continue on to getting full-time jobs. And this is creating good employment for Kenyans and East Africans in general. So we've had a very good progress last 1.5 years or 2 years in reskilling and upskilling our technicians. The other thing we've done during COVID is because we couldn't travel, we actually digitized most of our training. So we don't necessarily have to travel to Tanzania or Uganda. We can do a lot of this training on Zoom. I think about 80% of our program, for at least in terms of knowledge training, has moved. So they only come in for 2 or 3 days when there's actually a physical training in the workshop. So that's also been a big challenge for us, but also a big opportunity for us to change our training programs. In terms of fit out for workshop, I think it's pretty standard. I think we pride ourselves in having the best tools and equipment. You need all the necessary equipment and tools. They are, in my opinion, reasonable in cost. It's available. Suppliers like Bosch have a very, very good range. We find good range out of Europe as well, from other manufacturers as well. And we find that it's a big cost up front, but it pays back fairly quickly in terms of as long as because it gives a lot of reputation to your customers. So we get good tire fall or footfall or vehicle fall within our outlets from day one. So I think it's a good investment. In terms of finance, finance has not been very sophisticated until now, but recently we are finding that asset financing is improving, and you can actually get asset finance on tools and equipment. So it's improving in the content regarding financing your tools and equipment too.
All right. Okay. Okay, thanks. Thierry, coming back to the point that Eve picked up on, in which you made the point around education, but also the importance of educating the consumer or the motorist regarding the fact that cheap is cheap. Again, sir, you educate me on this regard, and I believe you. I honestly do believe you that in the long run, I'm going to end up paying a lot more. But again, to the point of where we find ourselves economically, and that is in the short run, I cannot afford that initial quality outcome. I'm just wondering if perhaps from education, there's also an opportunity for perhaps the industry to also come to the party, maybe introducing more flexible payment terms around this, or whether this has already been done in some parts.
First, I'm happy, Fifi, that you trust me, because it means that we are in the right direction. But apart from that, I think if you allow me to say, the question on fundings and education has always been a question over the decades in each continent on who should fund, how we should do it, and what should be the key driver about it. I think first, if you consider that we need to educate not only the technicians, but we need also to educate the car drivers. And not to educate, but to make them being more aware, to take the right decision. I believe that this is not only a question that needs to be asked to the corporate and to the industries. Of course, the industries will do his own job. Of course, the industry will support, will work. But it's also a question which needs to be raised to the government. You know, if you want to create a type of very interesting and supporting feeling, you need to give some type of incentives to the people who play the right game. I insist on that because we sometimes forget to say two things. Using crap products, I don't want to come back to your expression, but using crap product is also a way to pollute more. It's also a way to not play the game of our industry. It's a way of creating more risk, being in an environment less safe, potentially bringing more issue to the young population or to the population that are working because they will be not in the capacity to work. It still continue to have this type of lack of transparency. But if we're in this way of thinking, as I said, it's also creating more parts to be recycling, because for the moment, this is something that we don't really talk too much. And I insist on that because if we start to use scrap products, if people start to think about using the cheapest price product will be the best way for me to act, the problem is that it's not only the problem of the industry, it's also the problem of the government who need to take the right action to go in the direction of mobility and sustainability, bringing educations, and of course, bringing some, let's say, more incentive for the people who will take the right decision. Of course, it costs more to equip a center with some qualitative tools, with some qualitative product, with some qualitative diagnostic tools, for example, or solution. Of course, nobody argued that. And industry is already providing good payment terms, is already providing good way to potentially consider the issue from a pricing perspective and to arrange that. But at a certain moment, I also think that it needs also to come from more incentive from governments to encourage people to go in a more qualitative, long-term, especially, vision, and to create this need. Plenty of solutions can be imagined. And we were talking in Europe with the European Commission linked to sustainability not so far ago. And it's exactly the same question. When you want to attract people to be more green, want people to be more responsive, you need, unfortunately, in our world, you need to also create an incentive to stimulate that. And it's exactly the same in Africa. So my answer to you is, yes, for sure, industry, corporate, we, all of us being representing different stakeholders in this industry, we are making a lot of efforts, we are making a lot of investment, and we will keep on investing and we'll keep on developing all that much, much more in the near future. And that's a guarantee that I can give from our side. But the point is, we cannot do it alone. It needs to be a joint forces, a combined effort that we find the right way to stimulate and to create an incentive which will indeed allow us to fight against counterfeit, to provide more safety, more clarity, more transparency, and definitely more value to this industry, which needs much more people, which needs much more education, which needs much more investment. So I think all the different ingredients of making a nice success story for the people, for the industry, for the government are there, but now we need to work more together in those initiatives. And allow me just to give one example, and that we're working currently ourselves and with some of the people in the panel list today. We're working in a concept on mobility and sustainability maintenance for Africa. We'll provide some more guidance later on about that, but it's very interesting to see that as soon as we want to touch about moving to some more mobility concept, moving to some more education and more, we need to have discussion with government to find the right way to address it with the right scale, and not only to make one time story or whatsoever. And that's really something which is important to me, because alone industry will not succeed, or will succeed only partly. And I think Yves represents a company which is quite an exception of what I just said, based on the success that they have done and all the investment and all the effort they have done over the decades in the continent. But there's not so many companies that has done that in Africa, in our industry. So I think it's also something that needs to be said, because it deserves a real action plan. It deserves that governments go in more, maybe in mobility day, go in more mobility forum where we can explain, where we can give a plan, a roadmap, in order to make things happen and move in Africa. Otherwise, it will always be a one-time event, and after we'll move away to something else.
Sure, point taken, and perhaps you're inviting a follow-up conversation to take place this time with inviting government members on board to discuss the roadmap and exactly what is needed from their part to make sure that we do go in the right direction. But gentlemen, again, I'd like for us to change gears a bit and just talk about a policy tool that was introduced at the start of the year for all of us, for the entire continent, to potentially benefit from, and that's the Africa Free Trade Area deal. And Ibrahim, perhaps you can start us off on this conversation. To what degree will the AFCFTA be a game changer for your industry in your view?
It will be a game changer in terms of establishing a local industry in our markets. Today, we are relying very heavily on importation of our aftermarket parts from different parts of the world. But for example, luckily now in Morocco and Tunisia, maybe that they have started to have a proper industry, as well as in South Africa. But there is several other countries that are still missing on that. And by having this free trade agreement would allow the movement of parts among the countries much easier and a much lower customs rate.
All right. And then Yves, I mean, you and I were talking about this in preparation for this conversation today, and the AFCFTA can be a great thing, but however, there are a few thorns that one must be mindful of, particularly when it does come to localization and perhaps the point of origin for some of these parts. Just could you care to explain to the rest of the panelists your caution around the AFCFTA and how to ensure that it actually does live up to its potential for the aftercare car market, sir?
Thank you. In fact, this is the AFCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, is a huge opportunity. I think that we all are on the same page on that. We can agree that for the next 10 years. This allows me to elaborate on the next step. Today, if you look at what's happening in the continent, is that only 60% of the goods which are manufactured in Africa are traded within Africa. You have to think about that for 1 minute. 16%, 1/6 of the goods manufactured are traded within the region. We are talking about 54 countries. We are talking about a continent with more than 15 cities bigger than New York. And we are talking about 1.3 billion people, and this is subject to double in the next decade. And now really a rapid urbanization. So it is a huge potential, right? It's a huge potential. However, the reality today is that if we are not able to into this potential, if the government and everybody is not joining the table to roll out this trade agreement, which has been defined now, then we won't succeed. A couple examples are, if you import some part today from Europe, you will have some country in the North African area which have very good agreement with Europe. This means certain products will come on a special duty or free of duty. Here is the problem. So if I decide as a company, as Bosch now, to get those countries, for example, to Egypt or to Morocco or to Algeria, and I have a warehouse there, guess what happened? The problem starts once I get those those goods in the country will be free of charge. But as soon as I try to move them over the border, they are losing their European origin. This means they are subject now to 15 to 25% duty. So, and which make that no more competitive and no more affordable. And you are back to the affordability of the parts. How we are tackling this topic right now nowadays is that we are very, very specific in terms of our local footprint. This means where, before we decide about establishing a warehouse, we make really a very deep, intensive deep dive on those scenarios and this we do it on the short term, on the mid-term, but on the long term. Because what does it mean in terms of trade barriers? Because if you don't consider that in your equation, you might have a positive business case based on today. But in 2 years down the road, there is no more a positive business case. So this is what will happen. In addition to that, if you allow me to elaborate also on the previous topic of affordability and entry point, I mentioned the Bosch Car Service, the franchise. And as I mentioned, with 30,000 of this franchise globally, what we have done in Africa is that our standard Bosch Car Service today allow mechanics or workshop to repair almost everything around the car. So this is the standard Bosch Car Service. What we did here on the continent and with the team, what we have today in about 6 countries and serving 40 country trading in the world, we have created or established a new concept which is more fitable for Africa, what we call the Express Bosch Car Service. What is this about? First, the entry barrier in terms of investment is significantly lower. The equipment is significant also lower, and the complexity. And this is about your oil change, your maintenance of your aircon, and your filter change, and so on. So there is a strong bottom line. What I want the point I want to make is that there is a strong willingness to come up with African tailor-made solution which fit to the market, right? This is ongoing and we have to do it, and there's no way around that. And like was mentioned by Nexus, by Thierry, it is essential that all the stakeholders are joining us on this journey, right? Financing scheme, government, policymaker, and all which play a role there. And also university adapting the curriculum, and the university, I mean, Morocco has been very successful in that, adjusting their curricula in order to serve the car manufacturer, which has been a success story so far in terms of automotive deployment. So that's the point I wanted to make in this regard.
Okay. You forgot the fact that the media must also be there to facilitate the conversation amongst all you stakeholders. Just a bit of a joke there. Thierry, again, back to you, sir. The issue around sustainability as we head to the finish line of this particular race, this particular discussion, I just want to pick up and tease a little bit more on sustainability, as the industry now is racing towards electric vehicles, and 2030 is the target there. And the primary market here on the continent is actually concerned that Africa may become a scrapyard, right, for cars coming from all over the world that don't tick the green box, as it were. What does the race to EVs and the 2030 carbon targets, what does that mean potentially for the aftercare car market here on the continent?
Thanks, Fifi, for this question, and I think I've seen some smile on the picture of some of the people in the panel, and I think when we talk about this famous date of 2030, 2040, 2050, first we need to just raise a couple of points first. First is that up to 2030 we'll still have a situation at global level where the thermal engine cars produced will be much higher than what we'll see in terms of EV vehicles. So I think it's something for sure. There is an EV trend that progressively is gaining market shares progressively everywhere. But the first thing that we have to address is that we're not talking here about a short-term story. We are talking about a mid-term, or I will even say about a very long-term topic. If you add to the point that up to 2030 we'll still have an increase of the number of thermal engine cars that will be produced, basically it means that when, as Yves was saying at the beginning, the aftermarket is coming on the market after a certain number of years. And basically, if you consider the fact that in Europe you have an average car park which is between 10 to 11 years, sometimes in many countries higher than 11 years, in Africa between 16 to 20 years, you can easily imagine that we are talking about a long run here. I think when you talk about sustainability, for me, sustainability is a very significant opportunity for continent, for government, and for population to act and to create a new business model, a new circular business model in the way we want to act, in the way we want to deal with our engines. And basically, allow me just to explain a few things. First, as I said, definitely we cannot let it go by just thinking that one continent would be the place where all the old thermal engine will end up their life or whatsoever. No, we have there's a lot of different regulations. There's a lot of change that are coming, where basically manufacturers are also constructors are also responsible for the end life of a vehicle and the way it will be recycled. It will be recycled. So if suddenly you come to a situation where a car manufacturer has to become responsible for recycling his car at the end of his life of usage, it brings a couple of questions on how it can be done through different continents. So I think, to me, to make long story being very short, I think talking about sustainability is a must-have for the moment for all of us. We need to progressively think about what is the best way in each place, in each market, to progressively step in using sustainability as a way to stimulate new business opportunity, especially in our industry. Our industry has already made a lot of effort because we are always considered a little bit as a type of black sheet or dark industry because of pollution or whatsoever. But the reality is that we've done a lot of efforts, to give this transparency, to give a more green aspect to our product and to our services. Now, typically, how we bring sustainability at the level of the car drivers, at the level of the technicians and the workshops is a challenge. How we'll progressively train, how we'll progressively prepare our mechanics, our workshop networks to be capable indeed to provide more sustainable services and products, to convince also the ultimate car driver to be more to focus more on those elements. How we can build some new business model linked to recycling product, to remanufacturing product, to repaired product. It's something which is a key challenge, and that's why I was bringing sustainability before, and also we bring politics before, because it's a very significant opportunity for Africa to also deal by himself. It's also an opportunity to try to recycle by himself, and for the consumption of parts and product that has been used and that need to be recycled. So that's a real industry. Remanufacturing is also a real industry that can very probably be considered and deeply think in at the level of African market. So to me, I will not consider at all that for the moment at the midterm level that the impact on EV grow at global level will have damaging consequence in Africa regarding how Africa will be perceived.
All right.
But definitely, I foresee much more opportunity in considering sustainability in the way we want to change our model and the way we want to better prepare the model of tomorrow, better educate, because if you talk EV, you need to talk education again. Because the car are very different, so the engine also. So that's why it's something which cannot be disconnected with mobility and with the future trend that we need to bring to create new business model.
All right. Point taken there, Thierry. And I suppose, I mean, as we journey towards that 2030, 2040, 2050, it will be quite important to know what cars are on the road from EVs to, I believe it's called ICE, the terminology in your industry, and also where these cars are coming from. The point that I'm trying to make is the importance of data here and vehicle tracking, as it were. And Ibrahim, if you can just talk to me and just perhaps even finish off this conversation for us around the level of data and vehicle tracking presently on the continent, and where you do see room to improve us knowing what we have on our roads.
Definitely, I am a very strong believer of BEV vehicles. The market will automatically grow exponentially if we look at the penetration of mobile phones in a country like Egypt, for example, 15, 20 years ago, and we look at it today, the jump is exponential there. Definitely, a lot of countries in Africa, particularly Egypt, will never become a scrap box for non-homologated cars in Europe, for example, because we do have regulations here that do prevent the importation of used vehicles. So already we are protected there, and the government is already driving the direction towards having sustainable cities. For example, Hurghada and Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt will become cities whereby only electric or CNG vehicles that will be allowed in there. And this is, as regulations, it's coming, and the government is pushing very hard in the direction of electrification. When we talk about the data available in Africa, unfortunately, or in particular in Egypt, because that's the country I know a lot about, we don't have accurate data that we can collect in order to estimate the market demand or the actual market size, to be able to have the parts ready on time and for the end user. In terms of vehicle tracking, again, the regulations until now are not allowing for us to have connected vehicles. I don't know why, but we are trying to find out and push hard for it, because a lot of the new electric vehicles are basically electric and they are connected vehicles at the same time. So this will help us, again, to be able to forecast our parts requirements properly, to forecast our service availabilities, and to be able to better serve the customer at the end if we have the data available.
All right. Well, gentlemen, a fascinating conversation that we have had. I mean, at the beginning, Eve did describe the aftercare car market as being one that is sexy. Not too sure I believe him, but it's certainly one that is fascinating and one that does have the potential to spur quite a bit of growth and economic activity on this continent right now. There's a number of points that you all mentioned, the issue of importance around education for the motorists and also for the workers at the workshop around the quality and the importance of buying quality parts, the importance of government also coming to the table to ensure greater protection against things like product dumping. I think the importance that you did leave us with, Ibrahim, in terms of ensuring that the Egypt won't be a scrapyard for anyone, and I think the same that needs to be said about the rest of the continent. But unfortunately, time has overtaken us, and we're going to have to park this conversation here for now. Lots more to discuss in future, and I'm looking forward to that discussion. But to all my guests, I'd like to thank them who did join in on this discussion today. Just a quick reminder: Janelle Shah, the Executive Director of Auto Express; Thierry Mougnier, the Chief Financial and Innovation Officer at Nexus Automotive International South Africa; Yves Nono, Regional President of the Automotive Aftermarket in Africa for Bosch, as well as Ibrahim Gataz, the chairman and CEO of SMG Group. And as our viewers, thanks once again for tuning in, and we'll do it again next time. Goodbye.